Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict Triathlon Podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors PrecisionHydration.com.
Precision Hydration offer electrolyte drinks in different strengths to match how you sweat. Personalise your hydration strategy today at precisionhydration.com, and you can get a special 20% off during August using the code OXYGEN20.
Food Cell,
the next generation of nutritional carriers designed to allow endurance triathletes and cyclists to carry enough food and gels while allowing easy access. You can get 20% off with the code OXYGEN20. That code's valid until the 9th of September 2018, so it's ideal for Ironman Wales. Check it out at flowcell.co.uk.
And we're also brought to you this week by Threo.
Delighted to have them on board. High performance apparel for active women, which is designed to fit and flatter your body. You can get £10 off any order over £40 and a free swim cap with all orders at threo.co.uk. Just use the code OXYGEN10 until the end of September.
All right, and welcome to the show. Welcome to our special podcast, special edition.
Yep, that's right. We are talking all things periods, Rob.
So, welcome to Blood, Sweat and Gears.
Athletes prepare for everything, but they often don't prepare for their period. You know, it's the curse, as they call it, but it's a healthy curse. I had to go on some medication that's normally prescribed to your grandma or your nana to try and halt my bone density getting any worse. I just thought, you know, Jess, you're going to be in a wheelchair one day if you don't sort this out.
I've had fellow pros reach out and be like, Mare, what do I do if I'm going to get my period? I'm scheduled to get it race day. And in my head, my first initial reaction is, you're screwed.
It hurts, it's horrendous. You're like, why is this happening on this one day of the month to me when it's race day? And I spent a lot of time sitting on the curb and crying in that race, which is not what you want to do in an Ironman.
I was like in a sports bra too. I was like, well, that is what needs to be shown, is the women bloat the 7 to 10 pounds that we gain. Ugh, it was pretty horrible.
All right, Hells, so talk us through, why did you want to do a show especially about periods?
I'm going to try and keep this pretty short, Rob, but basically I have written a blog about it, so you can go and read that. I was on the pill for 5 years, didn't have a period during that time, and then this last year I came off the pill and my period did not come back, and I just don't know exactly sort of what the reasons were, but it was all very, was it because I was doing lots of sport, was it because of stress? And when I wrote this blog, the reaction to it, it was just crazy. Like, I had women's institute groups getting in touch saying, this is amazing that you're talking about it, please can we share it? I had a lot of fellow triathletes getting in touch privately saying, wow, Helen, thanks for being so open and honest, this is a real subject that we just don't talk about enough. And that was why I thought, you know what, we can do this, we can get people talking.
Yeah, brilliant. And I've got to say, hats off to you for taking the step and being brave and starting the conversation that it looks like everyone was afraid to have and nobody wanted to have. So listen, tell us what's coming up in the show then.
Okay, so we're going to hear why it's so important to have a regular period, and it isn't just about having babies. We'll hear as well what it's like to deal with your period on race day and in training. We'll also tell you about a really amazing app, Rob, which will help not only athletes but coaches as well to manage their training and nutrition around their menstrual cycle. First of all, though, let's hear about the other end of the scale, not having a period. This is where we need to bring in Jess Piasecki. She's a lecturer in exercise physiology at Nottingham Trent Uni. She's also an international athlete. Amongst her credentials, she was European cross-country champion, she's been 10,000 metres English champion, and the British half marathon champion, but she has really learned the hard way.
I have been running since I was about 16, 17 quite seriously. I made junior teams for cross country and on the track, and everything was hunky-dory as you do when you're that age. You know, running's going really well, school. Life was brilliant, and I never ever had a menstrual cycle. And you know, my mum did flag this up with the doctors. We had blood tests, and she used to take me back every year, like they said, and nothing really ever came back that was, you know, wanting to worry about or anything like that. And just most people did put it down to, you know, you're sporty. You know, there's a bit of a history of late starters in your family, so it could be that. I did get told I had sort of multicystic ovaries and polycystic ovaries, but again, the diagnosis there was very shady, as it were. You know, it's quite hard to differentiate between the two. So anyway, I carried on, and when I was 18, I got a stress fracture in my navicular. And navicular, if you don't know, it's a bone in your foot. It's quite a large bone for the bones in your foot, and it has a really low blood supply, so it's really hard to heal. And at the time, although I was doing well, I was quite new to the sport, and we were quite naive, I suppose. I was just really, you know, riding the age train, as it were, with my coach and my mum, my dad, and everything. It was all great. But once I got this fracture, I didn't really know what to do. My coach was unsure. He didn't really have, and he'd never experienced anything like that before, particularly in a female, and neither of my parents. And we then got told about the female athlete triad and weren't really sure what it was. I always ate quite a lot. You know, my mum gave us great dinners and always has done. And I didn't really know anything about it. So I then tried to come back from my fracture. A lot of it I was doing on my own because, again, I didn't really know what to do rehab-wise. I don't think I had physio. Things like that. And eventually I went to university that following summer and started at Loughborough. I thought Loughborough was going to be great. I thought it was going to be the place to go. Running was going to fix everything and I was going to have a great time, you know, live my own and things like that. But then I got more fractures that following Christmas. So this was less than a year post-navicular fracture. Again, I still hadn't had any bone density measurements or anything like that. But doctors persuaded me to go on the pill because they said it would protect my bones. So I was 19 and I started taking the pill. I think I tried a couple until I found the right one for me. And then since 19, and I'm now 28, I came off the pill when I was 27. So that's 8 years I was on the pill for. And during that time, I've had a hell of a lot of injuries. There's no two ways about it. I've had multiple stress fractures, stress responses, and every time I was on the pill, I had a cycle and I thought everything was fine, everything was functioning. But, you know, it's not until recently that we now know that this is a fake period. It's not really classed as a period, it's classed as a withdrawal bleed. Because it's not your natural hormones, it's the ones you take through the pill, which is what makes you bleed every month. And through that, you don't get the right amount of estrogen that you need to protect your bones. And I found out this the hard way in 2012. The summer, I got a really bad pain in my back, and it was so painful. I cannot describe the pain. I actually thought I was dying one night. That is no word of a lie. I couldn't breathe. It was so bad. I went to doctors and everything. No one knew what it was. And then when I was, it was a bit later, I eventually had an X-ray, and they found out it was a compression fracture in my spine. So a couple of the vertebrae had sort of squished. I remember having the X-ray, and they made me like wait in the room because, you know, they don't normally do that. They normally just shift you off and bring the next one in as soon as possible. But they made me wait around because they wanted to get someone else in to look at the scan like a few times over because I obviously knew something was wrong. And then, I had 2 compression fractures, and I'd been taking this pill. I was also on calcium supplements, and I got sent to a bone metabolism specialist on the NHS, and I still see her to this day. She's an excellent doctor, and I see her every 6 months now without fail to have update scans. But it was from there I had to go on some medication that's normally prescribed to your grandma, your nana, to try and halt my bone density getting any worse than it already was. And from there, it seemed to sort of settle. I never really had any back issues. I still got lots of other muscular injuries, like I tore my hamstring 10 centimetres, I tore my plantar fascia, I had some other things. I forget, there's that many, to be honest. And in 2016, I probably did try and increase training a bit too quickly following my plantar fascia tear, and I got some more fractures in my spine. And I had some quite in-depth scans, and it turns out like my spine, I have thoracic fractures from T4 or 5 to like T11. So all those vertebrae have squished. I've lost 3 centimetres in height since all these fractures began. And then from that, I suppose I've changed my perspective since then on life, as it were. And I had to go on like an injection that I took for 18 months. I took it every day, had to inject in my stomach. And that was a more sort of severe medication. So that works off parathyroid hormone, and it replicates it and can really increase your bone mineral density over a short space of time. But I had to make the decision, did I want to take it now? Because I won't be able to take that later on in life, should I need it, because it's not prescribed. The medications might have changed by the time I'm 70, but at the moment I won't be able to take that later on in life because I've had it my once in a lifetime, as it were. So my bone density has improved, but that was from the medication. And in 2017, I had another fracture in my back at my rib, so things are still quite delicate. And I got married last year, and I just sort of thought, you know what, I really need to get healthy. I really want, I want to start a family someday in the future. And I need to try and come off this pill. I consciously tried to put on a bit of weight, tried to make sure my calorie intake was where it should be. And I just came off the pill and thought, I'll see what happens. And my doctor knew I was doing this, because normally when you stop taking the injection medication, you go back on the other medication to just sort of stabilize your bones again. But because I wanted to try and see if I could have a natural period and start a family in the future, I came off every medication, as it were. And about 3 months later, I actually had my first menstrual cycle. And so I'd like to say I hit puberty when I was 27. And since then, my cycles they're not regular yet, but they are coming. I think one was 3 weeks, one was 3 days, things like that. And here I am now. That's sort of my story in a nutshell. Lots of trials and tribulations, lots of ups and downs. I am running now. I'm probably running the best I have done for quite some time, actually. But I haven't raced yet. I don't feel ready to race, and I'll just race when I'm ready. I've started a new job, and there's a lot of going on in life, as it were, at the moment, so I just prioritise that. And then if I can train, and I'll train to the best of my ability, and hopefully race come autumn time. But again, we'll just see how things go. And that's my story.
Wow, that is one story, Jess. What was the hardest bit throughout all of that?
I think I got really, really down when in 2015 I was running really well over the summer, and I'd obviously had my other fractures, but running I'd still managed to get some performance, like, maybe it's just a couple of snippets each year, and running was still sort of the forefront of my mind. I was still working and going through education and things like that. So I've never sort of committed to running full time. I don't think I'm that type of athlete. But I was running really well in 2015. I had a great summer, and I wanted to try and do the marathon in Frankfurt to get a Rio qualifier time. And during that marathon, I tore my plantar fascia. So post that, I was really, really upset for quite some time, more so than I am normally. And I think it was because I'd been running so well for so long. Well, for me, like over a 6-month period, running had been going really well. And then obviously plantar fascia is really quite painful because I tore it, and you have to be in the boot and offload it totally for some time. And that was really difficult. And then obviously come sort of the January 2016, I was obviously really motivated and wanted to try and get to London Marathon, which was obviously a short space of time coming from an injury of 0 to marathon in the April, which I knew it would be tight. But I always cross-train quite well, so I find it okay to come back. But a marathon's a whole different story. And that time when I refractured my back in that January, I got so upset because it sort of scared me a little bit. I was 26, I was getting older, I was living with Matthew, who's now my husband, and you've got all these different things going on in life, and I just thought, Jess, you're going to be in a wheelchair one day if you don't, someday soon if you don't sort this out. And I think it was a really quite hard, upsetting time, but also I probably needed it to try and change my perspective a little bit, and just put my health first. And I think it was from then that I really, really prioritised my health over anything.
When you found out that you had lost basically 3 centimetres of height, how did you find that out?
It's just from every time I go to the doctor, you get weighed and you get measured, and it's the same scales, it's the same person. And I think it was probably one of my earlier fractures, like T7 and T8. Over time, they've got so small that my height has just come down on those scales, which is inevitable, really, if you have a compression fracture.
Did it shock you?
It did. I think, you never really think about something like that when you're, 22 at the time, 23. And yeah, it was scary. Again, I think sometimes you can be blinded by the performances in running, and you just think, oh well, it was happening to me. I couldn't say, oh no, it wouldn't happen to me, but you just don't really think of the longer term consequences. Whereas something like that and all this medication, eventually you have to think about it. Sometimes as a runner, you just think, oh, well, this is part and part of the parcel, but it shouldn't be. And it isn't part and part of the parcel.
That was what I wanted to ask. Did it almost seem normal to have, recurring stress fractures, or a number of different stress fractures?
It did, really, because, every athlete goes through injuries, and every athlete has their ups and downs. Obviously, I did seem to be more at the doctors than most of my athlete friends, than others. But because I was still managing to get glimpses of the athlete that I was, and glimpses of performances here and there, you just thought it was part of it. And I think every time an athlete gets injured, you automatically just start thinking the other side of the injury, and you forget about why you've got there, and what's happened to make you injured or unhealthy and give you those problems. So you can just you put the blinkers on a little bit and just go automatically to the next goal without actually stopping and thinking, right, what have I done? What can I change? And what do I need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? I think we automatically go to, right, okay, I'm going to do this. And when I run, I'll do 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and then I'll be back running by this date, and then I can do this race. And it's a bit like that, whereas sometimes you need to just stop.
Did you talk about it with other female athletes? Would the subject of periods and menstrual cycles be part of any conversation?
I think sometimes we did talk about it, but not to the extent of, oh, I'm regular, I'm not regular, I don't have menstrual cycles. I think it was almost a given that most of us didn't. I can't speak for everyone. That I'm sure some people have them normally, But I think quite a few of us didn't during the time, but just shrugged it off, and it wasn't really a topic conversation. You wouldn't have an in-depth conversation about it at all. And I think me personally, I kept things quite close to my chest. I don't know why. That's just the person I am. Because everybody, you're competing against them as well at the same time. You want to make that team in cross country. It's top 6, at the trials it's top 2, things like that. So you don't want to give away what's going on, really. And I've always been, I'm not in a training group as such. I've always sort of just kept myself to myself. And I never really talked about the medication that I was on or what I was going through and things like that. Obviously, I spoke to my coach and he knew. But again, we wouldn't sort of portray that information or have conversations about it with other people. I could have a conversation with him about it, but at the time, but we, once I was better, we just sort of cracked on with training again, really.
And what did your coach say?
I think at the time I was being coached by Mick Woods when I got my first fracture in my spine. He was really good. He's a great coach, and I attribute a lot of my success to him. And I'd still talk to him today. When he actually said to me, Jess, I think you've got a thoracic spinal fracture, like where I was describing the pain. I happened to be down at St Mary's when I first got the pain, actually, and then when I was going through it back home, I was speaking to him on the phone. He said, you need to go get an x-ray, and I did, because he said so, really. I'd seen physios and they couldn't diagnose it, and he diagnosed it over the phone, as it were, and he just said, well, you just need to wait till it's healed, as it were, and then we used to sort of work with strength and conditioning coaches to try and make sure we could do everything muscularly in my spine, as it were. Maybe do thoracic spinal movements and things to make sure I didn't get too stiff around that area. So he was really quite good, and I did keep him updated about when I was going to see the doctors on my bone health and things like that. But at the end of the day, there was nothing he could do. I don't blame him at all, or anyone, or anything like that. But I'd still have a conversation with him openly about it. So yeah, he was really supportive. And then I also had to have a navicular operation in 2013, and then post that I also had a load of other bones in my foot flared up for one reason or another. And at the time, we were both just a bit dumbstruck as to what to do, and he was just really supportive and said, perhaps we need to just take some time away. And I did. I went to the gym for 3 months and didn't run. I went to body pump and things like that, spin class, and still kept in touch with him and things. But we both decided that let's take a step back. And then I came back to him in the January and said, I still really want to run. He said, yeah, so do I. I want you to run. So we sort of built up again. So we've been through all sorts together, really. So he was always really supportive of it. I think now when all these people are sort of sharing their stories, I think that's one of the things we need to help is coaches in particular to try and have that conversation. I know Fitter Women are hopefully developing the coaching app, which I'm sure Georgie will speak to you about, and just them being able to have that conversation and know that should sort of be part of training as well. The menstrual cycle, making sure it is regular, not necessarily have to change training, but just making sure your athletes are having them and monitoring what each athlete's going on. Obviously it'll be difficult in big groups, but just making sure you make yourself available to have that conversation.
When you got your first natural period, what was that like for you?
Well, I was on my honeymoon. So of all places, I was in Costa Rica on my honeymoon. We went on one honeymoon. We were on a big travelling trip, so I hadn't quite prepared to have any of that, and so I had to go and buy some Costa Rica tampons, whatever they look like. So yeah, I was really pleased. I'd actually felt a bit funny the day before, and I was like, I wonder what's going on, and I totally forgot about anything like that because I hadn't had a cycle since I came off it in middle of October, and this was sort of middle towards the end of December, we were away. We were away for 5 weeks, and obviously it happened quite quickly as soon as we got away. So leading up to going away, it was quite stressful trying to fit everything because we were going away for such a long time. Work was busy. I was trying to finish things in terms of my PhD. Then obviously I went away, and I do think like the stress relief, as it were, probably played a big part. I was eating whatever Costa Ricans eat, so a lot of burritos and things like that.
Rice and beans.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of rice and beans. And I wasn't running as much when I was out there, but I'd only been out there 5 days. I'd still do like 5-6 miles every day if I could. And we were walking around and going around all sorts of places. But I think probably just chilling out and realising we were out there for like 5 weeks just made me relax, and things happened. So yeah, I was a bit shocked, but also really happy as well, even though it was on the honeymoon.
It's like the weirdest thing, isn't it? You're like, yes, I've got a period.
I know, like, congratulations, you've reached puberty, you're 27. I was like, oh, thank you so much. But yeah, I'm really happy, and they haven't been a regular since, but I have had them. I've had like 5 or 6 since then now. I haven't got myself into a pattern, as it were, yet. My body's not ready for that, but I think we're getting there, and I'm just glad I'm having them at the moment. So I do think, my running has sort of picked up as well the past couple of months or so, and touch wood, I'm normally one person who does all the rehab and goes to the gym, does all the right stuff, and sees the physio once or every week or so. But because I've got this new job, I haven't had time for anything like that, and I'm literally just running and sitting at my desk or going to meetings or whatever. And I'm quite surprised, touch wood, that I've managed to held together. And I think part of that is probably my periods are happening now, and I've got the right levels of hormones, and estrogen's been shown to, have effects on muscle as well, and I've not had any muscular issues, never mind bone problems. So fingers crossed, things are working now.
If you could rewind the clock and do anything differently, what would you do?
Loads of things. I think when I was younger in particular, I did go through a couple of phases where I was sort of, I wouldn't necessarily, I was restricting eating in particular, so I'd like to just try and change that mindset a little bit. But also I would have held myself back when I was younger until my menstrual cycles had started, whether that meant, I didn't make the World Cross for the juniors that year or whatever. I would really implement that in myself. And I think, I do help some athletes now in terms of coaching and things like that, and that's what I try and implement into them. Like, longer term gains are so much better right now. When you're 16 to 18 is so important for your health and enjoying your life. You're going through a hell of a lot of stress at that age as well. Most of the people doing exams, GCSEs, A-levels, changing, going to university or starting work and things like that, that all has to be taken into account. And I think, I was quite a high achiever. I wanted to do really well in my A-levels as well, so a lot was going on. And I would have just held back myself on training when I was 16, 17 to make sure those cycles started before anything else progressed, really. And that's what I try and implement into athletes now.
You've got a website, runscience.co.uk. Just explain a little bit more about what you're doing with that.
Yeah, so I haven't updated it in a while. That is on my to-do list. But I want to try and help young athletes sort of understand their bodies a bit more, and the importance of the menstrual cycle, so I can provide sort of nutritional advice and guidelines and monitoring. Also, because of my extensive experience with injuries, I know a lot about rehabilitation, so I can provide that, because I know when you're young, it's hard to know where to look and who to speak to in terms of that. And people I have helped through injuries, and touch wood, they've come out the other side and not had any issues. And I just want it to be something that's, from me and for everybody else, really. And there's hopefully a few articles on there that will help sort of portray the science to an understandable language. So there's a couple of articles on there at the moment on sort of the articles that are in Athletics Weekly on female athletes and menstrual cycle. And I've got a couple of articles that I want to write on there as well about sort of exercise for older age and what's seen to be better. So through Run Science, I just want to try and help as many people as I can, because I know when I was younger, it was sort of difficult to know where to go and where to look. And the people that I have helped so far, touch wood, have given me quite good feedback. So hopefully I can help just as many people as I can.
And is what you've been through and what happened to you in, you know, your teenage years and your early 20s, has that influenced the line of work that you've gone into in your PhD research as well?
Yeah, I'd say so. So I think it started I did a master's degree from 2012 to 2014, and I went into that knowing sort of what I wanted to research, and I did research on female athletes and the effects on bone health of, you know, regular menstrual cycles versus having no menstrual cycles. And I did see a lot of athletes come through there who had problems, and it was good to get the information out there. And now I'm sort of involved in various groups from work that are looking towards female athlete research, what sort of areas need to be looked at. We're also trying to build a website, a group of us, on sort of a relative energy deficiency in sport. So that sort of encompasses all the problems that arise from low energy availability, and includes males in that as well, because we know that they can have just as many problems as females. So that's sort of being built at the moment. And it sort of really has guided me in terms of my passion. And, you know, in the future, I really hope to do more research. I've got a couple of projects that I hope to get lined up starting autumn time, and in a couple of years' time should be really useful to future athletes and research. So, yeah, it does help drive me a lot in my work.
It sounds like you have been through, like, utter hell, but actually now you're using that to help others.
Yeah, exactly. I think, you know, I just look back when I was younger, and if I did have some athletes that were older than me that I did train with and things, but, you know, I never really had the in-depth conversations with them, and I just want to make myself available for that, to speak, you know, for the young athletes that I am. I have been through a lot, and I can help others and talk to them about these issues if they find it hard to speak to other people. I want to be a person that's available to help, and I've got, you know, a few talks lined up as well coming up that I hope to deliver to young athletes and coaches and parents as well, because I think parents are sometimes overlooked when you're younger. It's all about the athlete and the coach, but when you're such a young age, the parents are so much involved. They're the nutritionist, they're the taxi driver, they're the psychologist as well, giving you pep talks before you go to your race. So, you know, they're so important. And I think my mum and dad felt that they didn't have enough information, and that it might have been different if they did. So I think they should really, you know, involving the parents just as much is really, really important.
Did you text them from Costa Rica?
Yeah, I texted my mum. Yeah, she's very pleased. I give her regular updates on it all now as well.
But I mean, yeah, for her though, I mean, it must have been awful to see your daughter go through that. Yeah,
you know, and that article that came out, they were sort of, it brought tears to their eyes, I think, a little bit as well, because they were there and experienced it all, and my sister as well. They lived through it. It wasn't pleasant times, but obviously I was so driven with my sport again. They couldn't sort of change the blinkers that I had on, because I really wanted to do running, and they sort of admire me for that. But, you know, they did everything that they could. And, you know, they were so supportive, and they're still supported to this day for my running and career and life and whatever. But it was hard for all of us, really.
So pretty powerful stuff there from Jess. Hey, she's really hammered home the idea that health should come first, and I think a lot of people will be kind of nodding their heads at that one. I think we might need to know a bit more now about the science behind periods and why they're beneficial in so many ways, Hells.
Yeah, okay. So it's time to say hello to Dr. Georgie Bruinvels. This woman is an elite endurance athlete. She's also a research scientist, but most of all, she is one of the most passionate people about periods I have ever come across.
When I was 11, in junior school, I actually started my period, which for someone who is now, I'm quite small. I'm on the small side. I'm only 5'2" 3/4" to be precise, and I'm quite petite. I think that comes as a surprise to some, but actually I was a really early developer, and I think I was in a tiny school, and I think I was probably the only person in my whole year, probably the only person in the whole school to have a period. And I was so embarrassed. I didn't go to school for the whole of my first period. And I just think I saw it as this massive barrier, and I saw it as something that, I don't know, I thought it was disgusting, and I thought it was just horrendous, and I didn't want to talk about it. In fact, I don't actually think I spoke about it to any of my friends until I was about 13 and at senior school. And I guess like my passion for this area stems from that. But then more latterly, like I feel really strongly about getting girls active, getting people to engage in sport. And there's obviously so many benefits of physical activity from a health perspective. And we know that the menstrual cycle and having a period is actually a really big barrier to that. So I guess that's another reason why I feel so strongly about that. And actually recently, Women in Sports have run this big survey and found that 42% of girls actually don't exercise when they're menstruating. And that just like adds fuel to my passion to like really try and like tackle this area. And I think because it is an indication of health, it is something that we all need to appreciate as a good thing and not to be seen as a bad, negative thing. And we kind of need to embrace the menstrual cycle and actually think, you know, this is quite cool. It's unique to women. 50% of the population are women. Let us understand it better and actually like be proactive here. My first study of my PhD was speaking to be precise, 1,862 women, and like basically looking at their menstrual cycle characteristics. And the number of women who came to me and said that their period really affected them, or there were various times in their menstrual cycle where they felt that their exercise performance was being affected. I feel like this whole area is just escalated in my head in terms of the importance of like appreciating and understanding the menstrual cycle. So I guess that's just fueled my passion that much more.
And aside from, you know, the importance of periods for getting pregnant and for babies, there are so many other reasons as to why it is important for women to have periods, isn't it?
Massively, like as I was saying around bone health, in terms of like the cardioprotective nature of estrogen, like purely developmental reasons, like these hormones are actually really important. But also from an athletic perspective, the changes in hormones can actually be utilized to like help optimize athletic performance. So there's so many different angles as to why these, like having the changes in these hormones and enough hormone is actually really, really important. And I think additionally, as I said, like it is an indication of having enough energy for your body to work properly, and also for your body to actually be working properly. Like having a period is a really good sign of that.
What you're a runner yourself. Why do you think it is that, you know, it is more common in endurance athletes that perhaps they don't have a period?
Yeah, so obviously in leanness sports, so sports like running, like gymnastics, like I don't know, road cycling, and also sports where like there's an aesthetic element to it. There's always this drive for thinness where, you know, people think lighter is better, but actually like you know, evidence and current role models are actually really demonstrating that isn't necessarily the case. Like there's obviously a really fine line. Like if you're, you know, really overweight, then you might not be able to run to the best of your capabilities. But actually, like I think there's this element of, you know, control. And I think the other thing is that by nature, like certain sports like running, tends to lean to people who may be more obsessive in nature. So that may come hand in hand with eating disorders, or also like high stress. And stress is another way that the HP axis, so the hormonal axis that controls release of FSH and LH, which control release of estrogen and progesterone, that can be affected by stress as well. So it all kind of comes hand in hand and can make a big mess if you kind of cross that line.
Tell me a bit about some of the research that you have been doing then.
When I started my PhD with Dr. Charlie Pedler being my primary supervisor, I started focusing on iron deficiency and the female athlete. So obviously women, because they menstruate and actually exercising women specifically, have an increased susceptibility to iron deficiency. Often they don't eat as much iron, they don't eat as much red meat or iron-rich foods as men. So women generally do have an increased risk of iron deficiency. But I guess the specific point at which people should supplement with iron is unknown. My first study of my PhD was actually looking at the prevalence of heavy menstrual bleeding, and alongside that, I interviewed, as I said, at 1,862 women, but also I wanted to capture whether they felt that their menstrual cycle affected their training and performance. And I guess accidentally I came across this whole minefield of all these women saying that their menstrual cycle disrupts their training and performance, but also I established that, well, we know that amenorrhea, oligomenorrhea, so the absence or infrequent menstruation, is common in exercising women, but actually heavy menstrual bleeding is also really common, which is really interesting. And I also established that, as I said, a whole load of women feel that their menstrual cycle affects their training and performance. So I kind of came across this minefield topic, which I just feel really strongly about.
And so what have you found then about people's cycle and their performance? Are there days when they should take it easier? Are there days when actually their hormones are going, yes, bring on the exercise?
Yeah, so great question. So we have done a lot around this area, and we've also I guess through working with so many different women and speaking to so many different women, that it is a case of certain people feel that they are able to better perform on certain days, and others may actually really not resonate with that. But really found that there's certain times in the cycle where it's more advantageous to do certain types of training, for example, driven by the changes in hormones. And, there's certain times in the cycle where it's more important to eat certain types of food. So, for example, in the second half of the cycle, catabolism of protein has been found to increase. So it's really important to refuel at that time. Whereas in the first half of the cycle, adaptation to resistance training has been found to be more advantageous in the second half of the cycle. So by manipulating training, you can actually get maximum performance benefit. Also, really significantly, I like to try and say this to people, if you step back and think about PMS, what is PMS? So as the hormones drop off towards the end of the menstrual cycle, there's this increase in release of prostaglandins, and that can drive an inflammatory response. Hence why you take anti-inflammatories to target these symptoms. So actually, if we convey that to or work with women to, understand that, then they can proactively do something about it to reduce the impact of symptoms. And I guess where I'm going with this is we've actually recently, so at Orico, we've developed this app to facilitate this understanding, but also to provide training and nutritional information based on where an individual is in their menstrual cycle. So it's a free app, free to download. It's called Fitter Woman, FITR Woman, one word. And basically a user can log on into their menstrual cycle details and then gain specific information about what's going on in their body, and then the training and nutrition to support that. It also actually says, based on where you are in your menstrual cycle, these are the foods you should try and get into your diet. These are some recipes related to where you are. And I guess the most significant answer to your question is that, yes, there might be some times where women might want to take it easy, but actually I call this a no excuses app. I don't want any athlete that I work with to come to me and say, oh no, the Olympic final is going to fall on day X, Y, or Z. that means I'm not going to perform to my best. Like, we want to be able to provide the information to get athletes to be able to perform at their best on any one day.
I guess, and we will hear from Nikki Bartlett, who is a triathlete, and she always says that her day 2 is really, really heavy and just really, really painful. And if she were to have a race on day 2, you can't suddenly stop that. It would still be
exactly
hard for her.
Exactly. And that's so important. Like, I'd love to work with her to like step back and look at, like, let's look at her diet, let's look at her training, let's try and like better understand whether there's, I mean, I'm not saying we're magic workers, because we're definitely not, but, you know, it's just about being informed and understanding, and what can we, you know, can we help to, you know, see whether there's a reason why they're bleeding heavily. For example, like, is it that she's a heavy bleeder? Like, could there be an underlying medical issue why she's a heavy bleeder? Like, I just feel that this whole area needs to be opened up and better understood, so we can be proactive. Like, athletes prepare for everything, but they often don't prepare for their period. And that's crazy. It's like, you know, it's the curse, as they call it, but it's a healthy curse, a sign of health. But we can, you know, we can help athletes prepare and at least understand what's going on in their body to help them, you know, feel better about it, and then to be proactive to provide some solutions if we can.
You said there about it being a curse, and I think that is part of it. You know, I think when we spoke before we did this interview, I said to you that I had been on the pill for 5 years, and during that time I didn't have a period, and it was because of I was on the mini pill, so I knew that was a side effect of it. But in my mind, during those 5 years, I was like, this is brilliant for training. You know, you just didn't have the faff. Yeah,
and that's so concerning, and it's so true. I mean, that's so, like, so many people I've spoken to have said that, but I think there's just this underappreciation that people think, yes, I don't have a period, that's amazing, that is so convenient, and, like, obviously I totally understand that, but at the same time, like, I think the messages need to be got out there that, firstly, using a pill, like, that can hide an underlying energy deficiency, but also you're not benefiting from the natural estrogen that is released, you know, through your normal menstrual cycle. So I think there's so many important messages, which is brilliant that people have recently been talking out about their problems with their menstrual cycle, or, you know, lack of menstrual cycle, like people having, saying that they've got red S, or the female athlete triad. You know, that's great that people are talking about it, because it's raising awareness. But now, you know, we really need to do something about it and make sure that the doctors are understanding that, you know, what is best practice, and you know, people shouldn't just be given the pill without an understanding of what it means from their body perspective.
And that is a really good point that you make, because actually then and again, I'll bring my own story into this. I don't particularly mind talking about it, because I have written about it, and I think if you can talk about it, then it's good. So then I came off the pill, and then it's really then difficult to know, okay, I don't have a period, what the heck is going on, and what's that down to? And as you say, you're not really prepared at all for that side of it.
Exactly. And that's that. A lot of people have contacted us about that, actually. And I think it's so difficult because everyone's body's different. Like, you know, I always think there's a cutoff point for when someone becomes amenorrheic, obviously, but that's an individual cutoff point. Like, there's some people who, I mean, BMI is not necessarily the best way to, like, establish that, but there's some people who could have a BMI of 19 and then they lose their periods, or some people could be 18. You know, it completely varies, or based on percentage fat. Like, there's so many different points, but also we need to, like, from your perspective, when your body's on the pill, to suddenly come off that, it can take a while for your body to get used to that again. But then when do you know that, you know, you've been waiting for so long and it's still not come back? Like, how do you know that? Yeah, it's very difficult.
What about coaches? What role do you think that coaches have when it comes to menstruation?
I think that's an absolutely brilliant question. I think it's difficult. So obviously in running, along with many other sports, a lot of the coaches are male, and I really feel for them, actually. Like, I did a big presentation last year at the LTA coaches conference, and at least 70% of the coaches that attended were men, and they just said to me, how do you broach this subject? How do you even mention such a personal, private area? And I think it's really difficult. So I guess since then I've really been playing it over in my head and trying to work out how can we help with this. I think there's a really big education piece. Firstly, I feel that this area is becoming more and more frequently discussed. I think that the taboo nature of the menstrual cycle is going, and I think we've got to stop calling it a taboo, because that effectively makes it a taboo. But that still doesn't facilitate potentially a very awkward conversation, especially when you have young athletes. So we're really trying to work on an education program, so to help coaches understand what a menstrual cycle is, what does that mean, and also to educate athletes so that they understand. So the app is one way of kind of delivering that for athletes, but we're actually just about to launch a coach version of the app, so a kind of coach view. This will enable the coaches to, if an athlete consents, the athlete can they'll log their data in terms of their cycle, whether they're bleeding or not, how much they're bleeding, and also any symptoms they've got. And then the coach will be able to view that and be able to view all of their athletes at once on a big dashboard, and then see on any one day what symptoms an athlete's got. It also puts them in different phases, so the coach can understand what it means to be in that phase, what are the do's and don'ts of training and nutrition around that time. But it also really importantly flags to a coach if an athlete hasn't logged a period when they should. Now, obviously, we understand young athletes it can take a while for their cycles to settle down. But it's actually a really useful tool for the coach to see if an energy deficiency, for example, or a dysfunctional cycle for another reason is is kind of starting. So it's a good way to preempt any issue that could manifest further down the line. Also, this tool actually enables the coach to be able to see in advance, based on the cycle details that an athlete's given them, where an athlete will be in their menstrual cycle on any one date. So say they had the world champs in 2 months time, you could select the date of the final, and then you could see where an athlete will be in their menstrual cycle, or even if it's the county championships. But it provides coaches with a tool to understand this, and it also kind of facilitates the conversation. So an athlete can get training if they don't really feel like they can talk to their coach about their menstrual cycle, but they're happy to share this information. Then they can actually see before they get to training, the coach can see what state the athlete's in effectively.
There'll be a lot of females listening to this, and a lot of females who love triathlon, love running, love cycling, love swimming. Is there any kind of generic information, because I know we're all different, but is there anything that you can sort of say, well, actually do this before your period, do this for the days of your period? Is there anything like that you can say, actually it's more beneficial to do X or Y?
Yeah, so I think in terms of pre-menstrual, so in the PMS period, I think there's some really good kind of snippets of information which women can be really proactive to do. So typically at that time, that's where women may experience more cravings, they may experience some sleep disruption, and they may experience pain or find that it takes them longer to recover, for example. There's loads of symptoms, obviously. And I think being really savvy around your diet, having really good sleep hygiene. In the app, we've got some really useful tips around sleep and how to optimize your sleep at that time. And then I guess when you're actually menstruating, obviously nutrition is also really important, because you're actually losing blood. So there's lots of tips we've got in the app there. I mean, obviously in terms of phasing training, that's a big thing, which in the first half of your cycle, in terms of the adaptation to certain training types versus the second half. But I think the other big thing is just prior to ovulation, there's increased levels of estrogen can affect ligament laxity and biomechanics, and this can have an impact on injury risk. So I think in terms of good take home information, I think around that time, so sort of days 10 to 12, 13, depending on your length of cycle, that's for a typical 28-day cycle. I think it's really important to warm up really thoroughly, so get to training earlier, do a progressive warm up, particularly if you're in any sports where you might be changing direction, or you need to be coordinated and dynamic. And then from a recovery perspective, try and get some collagen in, I don't know if you might have access to collagen supplements or gelatin, just to help with recovery and repair post-training, but also think maybe that's the time when you should have some soft tissue work done. So there's loads of proactive things that we put in the app to kind of guide individuals through their menstrual cycle.
Isn't it fascinating that
it's so fascinating? And
5
it's so
years ago,
cool.
this just was not, you wouldn't know, and a lot of so much training advice, so many training books, they are written by men.
Yeah.
Pretty much aimed at men, really. There's not a whole load out there.
So if you go back to around the time of the Second World War, it was basically agreed and decided that most research should be conducted in men. There was concern about damaging unborn fetuses, so not knowing if a woman was pregnant or not. So it was just decided that research would be done in men. It wasn't until much later on that it was appreciated that actually women and men are different, and women have this menstrual cycle. And then because of the menstrual cycle, it makes testing women really difficult, because obviously their bodies are changing much more regularly in a much more distinct manner than in men. So basically it was then thought, okay, actually it's really hard to test women. It's going to cost more money. So let's, keep researching on men. And only around the time in the 90s, particularly actually in the US, the Office for Women decided that, governed that more research needs to be done in women. There needs to be more studies conducted in women. But obviously there's now this big gap, and there's a big lag. So there's still a delay in pushing studies out in women. And plus, as researchers, we're always wanting to find the next new thing. We don't want to go back and repeat old research that might have been done in men that wasn't done in women.
What do you hope to eventually achieve with Fitter Woman?
It's brilliant that people are talking about the menstrual cycle now. So Heather Watson in 2015 dropped out of the Australian Open and said that her menstrual cycle was the reason for this. It's brilliant that people are happy to talk about that. However, I kind of don't want them to have the need to talk about it anymore. I want to, I want us to better understand the menstrual cycle, and then actually to be able to be proactive and not to have it affecting performance. Also, I really, really hope through Fitter Women to, as I was saying, facilitate that conversation between coaches and athletes, and also to really help young athletes, reduce this dropout that happens as a result of puberty and menstruation, and actually to try and reduce this massive issue of red S and amenorrhea and female athlete triad. I want to provide a tool to kind of help as best we can to reduce that. And just to have the discussion, make it a normal thing. It is a normal thing. It is a natural thing. And, I really want to help people understand that, and just train smart. Understand that, if coaches working with athletes, coaches put so much into an athlete's training plan, and if they don't perform on any one day, they'll be asking themselves why. Well, is that because they're at a certain time point in their menstrual cycle? Well, can we convey that and then stop that happening in the future?
Is it all right, Georgie, to eat a shed load of chocolate before your period? Come on, that's what we all want to do.
That's a great question. Depends on the type. If it's dark chocolate, maybe. I think, I would never ever say no to chocolate. I actually really like chocolate. I would say that's my biggest weakness. Not really a fan of cake, but I do really like chocolate. I think in terms of from a cravings perspective, we've got to look at what is driving these cravings. So Insulin resistance basically changes through the menstrual cycle, so blood sugar levels are more likely to dip pre-menstrually and in the second half of the cycle. So that's why people get more cravings. So actually, like, let's think about how an individual eats. Like, do they just have 3 meals a day, or could we say that maybe we can incorporate some good snacks, at that time specifically, and maybe including protein at every meal to keep blood sugar levels more stable? I'm not saying no chocolate, but I'm just saying, like, let's try and be savvy about it.
Or the duvet days when you just all you want is your hot water bottle and to cuddle up and just be like, oh, I literally want a pin shoved into my stomach.
I mean, that's also a really interesting thing. So I think one of the other things that really fueled my drive and desire in this area to kind of get to the bottom of it, is that the number of websites that say, oh, when you're on your period, the best thing to do is to curl up in a ball with a hot water bottle. Absolutely not. I remember from my first period, my big sister saying to me, no, Georgie, you'll feel so much better if you exercise. And I remember I really did. And like, exercise not only releases endorphins, but it also has anti-inflammatory properties, depending on the intensity, obviously. And that can really help treat symptoms. So exercise has actually been found as like a way to reduce symptoms. So yeah, I think there's a whole education piece there.
And the bloat, how can we help to avoid the bloat then?
So yeah, the bloat's an interesting thing, and there's increasing research suggesting like different reasons for it. So it could be something to do with salt, like a salt balance, or it could just be like the hormonal changes in hormones that cause that. I would love to do more research in this area, but I don't think it is yet conclusive. But I would say focusing on like trying to get a really healthy diet at that time is really particularly important.
If you need any guinea pigs for the bloat research, I'm signing up right now.
Awesome.
Oh, Rob, I'm telling you, that bloat is horrible. The bloat is horrible. I don't know if guys get it at all.
Health, it's really amazing to listen to this because, like I said earlier on, guys just I don't get this. You know what I mean? I don't understand it. And to hear how it affects, essentially half the population in a completely different way to how it affects guys, it's really eye-opening and mind-opening.
Well, hopefully we've learned a little bit more there, and we will hear a bit more about those effects. But one thing that Georgie did talk about is the Fitter Woman app. And honestly, it is an absolute must for all female athletes. You can track your cycle, and then you can get personalised nutritional and training suggestions around it. So go and check it out. Honestly, it's www.fitterwoman, which is FITR, so fitterwoman.com.
Okay, now before we hear from 2 more guests, it's a reminder that you're listening to Blood, Sweat and Gears, a special episode from the Oxygen Addict Triathlon podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, Precision Hydration, who offer electrolyte drinks in different strengths to match how you sweat. You can personalise your hydration strategy today at precisionhydration.com, and you can get a special 20% off during August using the code OXYGEN20.
We're also brought to you this week by Threo, high performance kit for active women, which is designed to fit and flatter your body. You can get £10 off any order over £40 and a free swim cap with all orders at threo.co.uk. Use the code OXYGEN10 until the end of September.
I was checking out their website before, Hells, because I haven't seen that before, and I've got to say it's some smart looking kit, really nice looking threads.
It's awesome because it is designed by women, and they are also athletes, so they absolutely get the comfort thing. And I'm so happy to have them on board with this podcast, because I just think it's great to be able to work with a female brand as well. So yeah, check them out, threo.co.uk.
And we're also brought to you by FoodCell, who are the next generation of nutritional carriers, designed to allow endurance triathletes and cyclists to carry enough food and gels while also allowing easy access. There's the key. You can get 20% off with the code OXYGEN20. The code's valid until the 9th of September 2018, and it'll be ideal for Ironman Wales. You can check it out over at flowcell.co.uk. Hulls, this week I've even had 2 big chunks of Sainsbury's flapjacks crammed into my Flowcell while I was out on a ride.
Oh, really?
Awesome. Fits perfectly straight out of the packet. So nice work. Another tick in the box for FlowCell. So check it out, flowcell.co.uk. Use the code Oxygen20 for 20% off.
And finally, our patrons who support the show with a monthly donation, you can check it out at oxygenaddict.com/podcast, and there's information there about how to become a patron.
All right, Hells, I've got to ask you, have you ever had your period on a race day?
So, Rob, funnily enough, well, it wasn't funny because I just was dreading it.
Doesn't sound funny.
No, it wasn't. My first ever triathlon.
No way.
Yeah, and I just remember it being an absolute... I was just so scared.
As if you've not got enough to be scared about already.
Exactly. I was so... It really did make me want to pull out of it, I remember, because I was just so uncertain about the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have, and I can't really imagine doing an Ironman with a period, but obviously lots of women have to do it. So we're going to hear from Nikki Bartlett shortly. She had her period, Rob, at Ironman Lanzarote this year. But first, let's hear from a new mum. She's completed 60 full-distance Ironman races, but like Jess Piasecki, who we heard from earlier, she hasn't always had a regular period. Meredith Kessler, it's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. You probably thought, what the heck, when I said, oh, would you come on? I want to talk to you about periods.
I love it, Helen. We need to talk about periods. I mean that in like the most endearing way, because it's just part of womanhood. Most of us deal with it. It's sort of the unspoken word for so many. And shoot, I mean, I'll talk about it because it's like part of life, and we just have to roll with it, all of us.
So have you always had a regular period?
That would be a big old no. You know what? I think I was about 19, just being an athlete my whole life. And what was happening is I was getting like these little niggles all the time, like stress fracture here, and a lot in my pelvis too. I stress fractured both my pelvis in high school track, and I specifically remember actually going for like this state title, and my dad, after 6 laps of an 8-lap race, had to come down to the track and like literally carry me off it. I still, at like 40 years old now, I still remember that. And I just kept getting injuries like that over and over again. And it was like, oh, that's because, Meredith, you're 16, 17, 18, 19, and you've never had a period, just being like an athlete my whole life. So I was borderline osteoporosis too at that young, and that's not good. So I had to do something about it. And so I had to actually take the birth control pill to even get my period to begin with. And I took the pill from that point on 7 years. So I didn't know if I could even get it on my own. It was being manipulated by the birth control pill. But I'm telling you, that pill for me back then, I'm sure it's changed. It either one made me fat, one made me crazy, one made me like super irritated at life. And I just was like, I got to get off this. I was hormonal. So I got off at 26, and what was great and crazy at the same time is I got off, and literally 28 days later on my own, I got my period every 28 days from that point on. And now, I know, as you know, I've been, I just had Mac, 8 months ago, and so I'm still nursing him, and I haven't had my period in about 1.5 years or whatever right now, and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of cool and kind of nice. But when I am done nursing Mac, I really will go back to how I was before getting pregnant. It's like, I want to get my period every, 25, 28, 30 days is fine. But more than that, it's a real problem, because for injury, for health, for your hormones, you need that monthly estrogen release. It's so essential for our overall health. And so I know my husband and I, we wrote a whole chapter about it in our Life of a Triathlete book, because I mean, as you know, I've told you, Helen, I plan my whole race schedule around it, because it's just, I'm really miserable for like a day before I actually release. And once I release, then it's horrible. I'm talking like, if you really want to get it, it's like pulsing vagina lips, your kidneys are aching, and here you're trying to like race in a half Ironman or a full Ironman. It's a really big situation, and I've tried every remedy that you can think of. I connected with Stacy Sims, who's amazing, and she's so smart, at all of this. Like, she knows the female body. But I up my magnesium race week. I try to get my period early. I'll do carrots and pineapple and celery and like all kinds of things to try to get it, because I'm telling you, if I release and then I race 3 days later, that's your great time to race, 3 to 7 days after. So when I've been lucky enough to race in that window, that's a good thing. So that's how I feel, very summarized, of getting your period.
Wow. So what about Kona then, Meredith? When you had your period at the race where you really don't want your period,
right? And that's the bittersweet part of it. Is it's just, you can't plan. When I say I plan my race schedule around it, I say that gingerly. I mean, I really try. A lot of times you hit and hope. You're like, okay, I race twice. Typically, I race twice a month. So the odds are I'm going to have it on a race. It's much more manageable to manage in a half, but a full, it's a little bit trickier. And I've had fellow pros reach out and be like, maybe first-time Ironman athletes, Ironman distance rather, been like, Mare, what do I do if I'm going to get my period? I'm scheduled to get it race day. And in my head, my first initial reaction is, you're screwed. I mean that in like the nicest way, because I've been that so many times. It's just like, it's funny. I'm really about your upstairs and your downstairs matching, meaning if you're mentally tough, your body will deliver. But sometimes when it has to do with your period, you can have all the mental fortitude in the world, and your body is just going to be like, what? So you put yourself on a Kona course. It's already so hard. I mean, you could have like the most perfect buildup. You could be so fit and so ready and so motivated, and then you need to be like that even to toe the line, no period, and still have a really hard day. So when you go into it and you have this whole other hormonal thing to worry about, it creates, another dynamic. And so I think in Kona, and I was saying to you, Helen, the year I got 7th, which is so ironic because that's the best I've ever done in Kona. But I mean, you should have seen me. My head was back, basically on the back of the pavement, running down, the Queen K. I was just looked at all the bloat, like was just around. Of course, that's the year I was like in a sports bra too. I was like, well, that is what needs to be shown, is the women bloat, the 7 to 10 pounds that we gain around our period time. It's water weight and that heat and humidity. Ugh. It was pretty horrible. And there was nothing I could do about it, So you just dealt with the pulsing vaginal lips and the kidneys that kill in your back, and you just try to hydrate as much as you can, take Motrin every 4 hours. Let's say ibuprofen, and hit and hope.
Before a normal race, there's, you're probably worrying about, oh goodness, is everything going to be all right with my bike, or am I going to fall apart on the run?
Yeah.
I guess you won't even. It's almost like those things completely go out of your mind, because surely you're more worried about, am I actually going to be able to get to that finish line with everything going on in my body?
Right. It's amazing how your mindset can change. It's like, do I have my gels? Do I have my drink? And it's funny, now it's shifted to, oh my gosh, is my kid going to be all right while I'm gone? And, is he going to be hungry because I'm out racing? I can't provide for him. I was really worried about that in Texas at 5 months when he wasn't on solids yet. Now I feel good about Tremblant because he's been eating more solids, but like your mind and your worries shift. And now, trust me, when I'm done nursing him, my worries will then go back to my period, because I'm just one of those, some people in this world, and God love them, I'm so happy. It's kind of like if you get really nauseous when you're pregnant. I was nauseous for 6-7 months. I was so ill. It was so worth it. I got to be pregnant. I was very excited about it, but I was a sick pregnant person. That's fine. I'm also a really sick period person. And there's some people out there, other women, that have wonderful pregnancies. They're like, oh, I'm a little sick in the beginning, but no, I'm all good. I loved being pregnant. Great. That's how they feel. And I'm so happy that they can have that. There's also period people like that, I mean, sure, oh, maybe they'll be, feel it a little, but some of my friends don't even know it's coming. They're like, oh, Mare, do you have a tampon? I didn't realize I just got my period. I'm thinking, how's that possible? Don't you like feel it coming? You feel the bloat, you have headaches, and God love them. I'm so glad that they don't have to, worry about that either. Everybody is so different in pregnancy and in periods.
Does your training, do you change it in accordance to the time of the month?
You know what? I have learned what works and what does not work, and it's kind of my rule of thumb of always giving it a half hour when you're having a web workout, web meaning why even bother, but around the time when I say by the time I'm about to menstruate, I'm feeling really heavy, just like meaning heavy, not heavy, in terms of like physically heavy. Your boobs are sore, your back hurts, your stomach hurts, everything's just off. And so honestly, sometimes workouts can make you feel better. So even if I don't want to do them at all, I'm always going to give it a go and give it a good, half hour. Because that is what I had to do Kona morning. It's like there's going to be a time of the 11 races you do a year. There might be a good chance 3 to 4 of them you're going to be racing on like your worst day of your period. Even 2 to 3 of them, So you've got to practice. Yeah. So what you can do: carrots, celery, watermelon, lessen the caffeine, up the hydration even more. Like common, simple stuff. But you actually really have to focus on doing it. And I'm one to be like, even my husband has to remind me, are you drinking? Yeah. So, super important.
Do you talk periods with some of your other athletes? Because you might have seen, I wrote this blog, and a lot of people got in touch with me and almost sort of separately, but almost said, this is really important, but we just don't talk about it.
Yeah, I do talk about periods. I'm an open book with it because it's, unfortunately, because it's just part of being a woman. It's been a part of us for hundreds of years, and so as athletes, we have it. I do agree we have it a little harder than maybe full-time athletes that just because we have, especially as professionals, we do this as a living. We're trying to, for a lot of us, it's our livelihood. So if a race falls on that time of the month, it's like, oh, shoot. So that's why I've spent so much time researching, learning, talking to people how to make it, a little less dramatic, if you will. And people are embarrassed. They don't want to, that's the thing. They don't want to complain about it. There's they don't want to have an excuse. Everyone could have an excuse for every race. Everyone's facing a battle we know nothing about. But of course, when you have your period, you don't want to say on social media, I had my period, so I did terrible. But it is a real thing. And so us gals together will be like, dude, I mean, texting, I've Kelly Williamson and she wouldn't care if I mentioned her name. She'll be like, Mare, dude, I'm going to get my period on Ironman Chattanooga. And we'll talk about it all the time, very openly. So it is good that you're bringing sort of light and awareness to that's an issue. And I was telling you, Helen, in Ironman Texas Pro meeting, someone asked, it was a question about what women do when they have a period, where can they go? And it really hit me in that moment how sort of it's the unspoken word, especially for males. And I'm not knocking the males, but I remember that one of the race directors was like, oh, let's talk about this offline. We don't need to talk about that in this forum. It was like he was embarrassed to talk about it. And I know it's like women bleeding. I get that. Gross. But it's not, because it's part of what we have to navigate through and deal with. So I did in that meeting want to stand up and say, hey, periods are kind of a real deal for us females. So you can answer this question in front of the males. I mean, they need to know that we deal with this also. So it's a real simple matter that needed to be addressed. And so I find too that it's, very not talked about. And I'm not trying to be a big feminist on women's periods. I'm just saying it's a thing, and it's okay to talk about.
So at the moment, and what tips would you have, Meredith, for any age groupers who have got a big race coming up and they know that they're due on that day?
Yep. Oh, so many. So, really try to keep your chi. That's the thing is our mind does play like tricks when we know we're getting it. You know, I have an app and I know when I ovulate and I know when I know a window of when I'm going to get the period, and I start stressing about it, or I used to rather, like several weeks before, like, oh no, and then I look at the weather and it's going to be hot. This is like 2 daggers. Because it is easier to manage, honestly. It's still like horrific, but in cooler races it's much more just easier to manage the period than in warm, humid races. But in any event, for those people, my biggest advice is to first, like, keep your chi on it, accept that it may or may not happen, be hopeful that it might happen on a good window where, like, say the race is Saturday. I promise you, if you get your period Thursday, you are going to have the best race on Saturday, because you've released that first part, and you'll have a terrible day Friday, and then boom, Saturday you are ready hormonally. You're just ready. At least that's how it works for me. And I would like, especially that week of the race, like the race is Saturday, you start extra a week prior, you know, a week out from that is on the hydration. I put emergency, like just vitamin C in my sparkling water. I have 2 packets of that a day. I up my potassium, my magnesium, a lot of fruits with water in it, such as watermelon. I try to get it early, and I know this is could be an old wives' tale, but it's worked maybe a handful of times, of, you know, the carrots, celery, pineapple, just trying to, you know, get it a little bit early so that you are racing in that 3 to 7 days post-period window. And then, like, that's the thing. But the number one thing is mentally, like, getting, like, ready. Like, you're like, I got it. I can do this. I've done X amount of races. I've navigated through this and this. I can do 4 to 6 to 7 to 9 to 10 hours on my period. I can do it.
Positive as ever.
Positive. It is key. And by the way, I say that now, but of course internally I'm like, why? Why is this happening now? Shelving the drama. Shelf compartmentalized.
I love Meredith's attitude there. Shelve the drama.
She's brilliant. She's just brilliant. So yeah, you know, she's very much about balance, and actually, what can you know, if you're going to get it, there's not a whole load that you can do about it. So shelve that drama. It was interesting as well hearing her talk about how she feels great on the 3rd day of her period. And Nikki Bartlett is actually in a similar boat. She says that she struggles massively on the 2nd day of her period, almost, Rob, to the point of being pretty much unable to do much training at all. So yeah, guess what happened at Ironman Lanzarote this year?
So Lanzarote is in May, so I'd had a regular one, as in to the day and hour, since like October, so a pretty long time. And then leading up to the race, lo and behold, with nerves and travel and that kind of stuff, I was actually a couple of days late, which is not like me. And then obviously it came at the exact wrong time. In fact, I had the worst day, was the day of the race at Ironman Lanzarote. So, you know, kind of, you know, what I went through and how I tried to deal with that through the race. So, and, you know, the more people you talk to and the more opened up about it, a lot of people have come to me and asked for advice, or, you know, they can relate well to it. So with it being such a taboo subject nowadays, it's important to talk about it, I guess. So yeah, I'm more than happy to share how I go through mine every month.
Have you always had a period?
When I was rowing, no. So I went through probably the age of 19 for about up until when I was probably about 20. No, but I was a lot lightweight, and I was always right on the edge of making weight. In fact, I always struggled. Like, I was fine at about 61 kilos, but our summer race weight was 57, and that was too light for me. It was too. I knew it was too light. I kept getting rib stress fractures and getting injured all the time. But yeah, I lost my periods for a good 5 years. But since I stopped rowing, I've never not had. I've always had one every month.
Did it ever worry you when you were a rower?
Yeah, parents a lot. I think my mum made me go to the doctors and kind of have a scan and make sure I was like still going through the, you know, same hormonal balance each month, which I was, but I was really unhealthily underweight. That wasn't natural for me. So So when I finished rowing, I obviously put on a few kilograms, and since I was absolutely fine. So yeah, whereas my parents, it did worry me a bit, but I was at that young, naive age a bit. So I was like, oh, it's brilliant, don't have to deal with it every month kind of attitude, rather than, okay, what's this going on health-wise?
When it did come back, did it affect how you did sport?
So yeah, I went through a few years after I finished rowing, not really doing much, so that was fine. But now, obviously a professional triathlete, it really affects me each month, to the point that day one I can just about train. I might struggle with intensity. Day two, I need either a day off or a really light ride, or I can't go to the pool. And yeah, day two is usually spent in bed, curling up in severe pain. Even with paracetamols and painkillers, it doesn't touch it. I really do suffer on day two, to the point, we have to factor in that every month as either a day off or a recovery day, but pretty much a day off. And then day three and day four, I feel amazing. But maybe that's because day two was so horrendous. I was like, yes, I feel. But no, generally day 3 and 4, I produce some of my best ever training. So I think what's going on in the hormonal side is actually giving me some good side effects.
How did you broach the subject with your coach? Because I imagine when you first started working with him, how's he to know that a day 2 of your period is a complete write-off?
We have such a good relationship in that we are so open and honest. So I started working with Rob in 2016, and he knew I struggled, and it hadn't affected my racing until Norway in the summer, which was July. And it was, it was going to be day 2, it was from there that we really recognised that day 2 was just, I can't race on day 2. To the point where, I'm having to go to the Portaloo a couple of times to, to deal with it. And it's just, you can't, you're just not in a race mentality at all. So from there, we were, quite good about, putting our training around that. And then we were like, okay, right, we need to make sure we now plan races around, because there's day 1 I can just maybe, but day 2. But actually, if I raced on day 3 or day 4, I think I'd perform way better to my ability than I would at any other point in that month. So if you could time it right, but then it's timing it right with travel, nerves, and everything what goes around preparing for a race. So different environment. So it's hard to plan. But if you got it on day 3 or day 4, for myself, it'd be amazing.
Have you ever taken like a pill or anything like that, or medication to delay it, or just, the contraceptive pill?
I'm not going to lie, no, because I hate even taking paracetamols, or anything in life. Like, I just like my body just to function how it is. And even to the point, like, Bex is always on about, just take some painkillers to try and get the pain to go away. And I'm just like, I don't like taking anything. So for me to go on the pill to stop my body from producing what it should produce naturally, but I can't get my head around it. So I prefer just to try and manage it some way, or I can't really manage it. It's just painful and horrible. But no, I haven't tried to, and I prefer not to if possible. But I have like a 27-day cycle, which is extremely hard to plan races around, because especially if you're early as well. Like, there's been a few races this year I really wanted to do, like Ironman Nice, but I just couldn't because I'd fall on, it was too risky, which is such a shame.
So when you're planning your year and which races you're going to do, at that point, are you mapping out when you're likely to be on?
Yeah, which then obviously you get, so when I crashed and fell off my bike before South Africa, we'd planned the year specifically around the cycle, but then I couldn't go to South Africa, so I was like, oh my God. And then the next 2 races were Ironman Texas and Ironman Lanzarote, which both of those races were going to sit in risk to that day 1 or day 2. So I knew Lanzarote was going to be a risk, but I think I had something like 3 or 4 days leeway, and I thought I'd be fine, but nerves and just worrying that will it come in time just upset it. And I did Ironman Lanzarote in day 2, and it's one of the most horrendous things I think I've ever done.
Why was it so bad?
It's just the pain. For people listening, some people might not get severe pain. Some people might get a little bit, but on that day 2, I'm cramping. My literally feels like my ovaries are cramping, and for a good 4 to 5 hours in the race, I think it was about 3.5 hours into the bike, I was fine for the swim and fine for the first 3 hours of the bike. It'll probably look like, for any outsider who's not really close to me or understands kind of me as a person, will probably think I've just bonked on the bike, because I went from catched in nearly to the front to, oh my god, I need to sit down on the curb, my stomach is horrendous. So it's just the cramping feeling, you feel sick, feel dizzy, you can't take on nutrition, which is obviously not what you want in an Ironman. You just want to sit down and kind of hold your stomach, crying because you're emotional, and it hurts, it's horrendous. You're like, why is this happening on this one day of the month to me when it's race day? And so I spent a lot of time sitting on the curb and crying in that race, which is not what you want to do in an Ironman. But and having to go to the toilet to change and deal with it, it was horrendous, and it was such a hard race to get through, and I cried a lot through it. And then when I crossed the line, I cried even more, and I was like, I cannot believe I did that, because every month I'm either in bed or I'm having a recovery day. I know I know I can never do that again. I know that it's just something I never want to go through again. Horrendous.
Did you have tampons or something in your jersey pocket, and in a special needs bag, and in transition? Yeah, I had it transition. I had painkillers in transition. So I went. It was funny because I came off the bike and I was third, and the lead cyclist was waiting outside the toilet, and I was taking ages because I was actually I cannot run a marathon like this. This is impossible. And I was in the toilet for a good 2-3 minutes, and I was like, this is ridiculous. And then I only came out because people were literally shouting, come on! There were supporters just up on the ledgeway, and they were like, come on, where is she? Because obviously they don't know, and you're in the toilet crying, and just I cannot come out and run a marathon in the heat. But it was probably good it was such a hot, it's known as a hot race, because my tactic then was okay, I'm going to get ice cubes, and I have a no-pins belt, and they're quite tight, so what I did is I put it, kind of quite low, and just put ice down my top, which acted almost like a freezer on my ovaries. So I just kept doing that and stopping and doing that in the race, and just really focusing on that. It was just bizarre, because you feel like you're not racing. You feel like you're just managing and getting through it rather than racing. It's just, and I can remember when I sat down to Bex, and I first saw her parents, and I just cried on them, and Bex's mum was like, come on, you can do this. And kind of, I took a whole new relationship with the in-laws to a whole new level, because obviously they went through the whole emotion with me. But every now and then I was stopping for a bit and just, allowing myself just to hold my stomach for a bit, and then carried on running, and just kind of managed it in that kind of way, which is, again, not ideal, but you kind of just have to chunk it into the smallest of parts, as in literally 5 minutes I was chunking this marathon into. It was the longest marathon ever. And then when I crossed that line at the end, it was so emotional. It's probably one of my proudest moments to get through that. It's got to be I know I could have done a lot better, and I know I think we worked out, 9 minutes of my race was sat down, which is just ridiculous. God. Then I don't know if it then helped me, because I had little breaks almost. It's like a little interval session. So you can't say I can take 9 minutes of my time, because that's not true, because it could have helped me in the long run. But it was very emotional when I crossed that line, and I was just so happy. I was like, thank you for getting me to that line. You don't have to name names, but do you talk periods with your fellow athletes? Yeah, some people do. Alice and Susie, they both have the same kind of pain, and all the way leading up to the race I was talking to them both, because they knew that if it was day 2 it was pretty much game over for me to race properly. You kind of you talk about it and then you kind of make a joke sometimes, and so they knew that it was going to be a long day. But Rob's brilliant. He does a lot of research around it, and decided not to go on and take any contraceptive or the implant or the coil, because if it had been one day, like I said, it's a Saturday race, so it was if it was a normal Sunday race, I'd have actually been
at what I call my best every month. So, it's hit and miss, and if you're going to get that one day every month where it's, unrealistic to put a great performance down because of the pain you're in, you've got to be pretty unlucky. So I guess I was just unlucky for that one. So, and then I really wanted to do Ironman Nice, which was exactly 4 weeks later, and I was like, no, I can't risk doing that again. So close.
Would you have any tips or advice for, age groupers or fellow pros about, dealing with their period on a monthly basis?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have that connection with your coach so that you can talk about it, because if it's just one day you really suffer on that, it's very easy just to swap training around a little bit. So to have that honesty with your coach is really important. And it's such everyone's, thinks of it as such a taboo subject. And it is, I don't like talking about it necessarily. And, it's taken a lot to build my confidence up just to talk about it now. Because I didn't want to really talk about philanthropy, especially because everyone who doesn't have it as bad or doesn't really have to deal with it, they'll just think of it as an excuse. But there's a lot of people who will be listening to this and think, no, I can relate to that. And it is a worry. And then I guess the more you worry towards a race about it, the more likelihood it's going to not be great for race day. So, yeah, I think just try and program your training around it, and just don't suffer in silence with it. And talk to people. Everyone's different. Everyone has, some people might not get heavy, some people might do. So, and there's a lot of people who there is to talk to about it. So, especially if you're not getting normal, regular ones, like, there's obviously a reason why. So don't suffer alone. Just go and talk to someone who knows what they're talking about.
Hopefully, Hels, this episode will get the ball rolling and it'll encourage more people to open up and talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really hope so. Because it isn't easy to do. It's not the easiest thing to open up to a complete stranger. So a massive thank you to everyone who contributed to this, to Blood, Sweat and Gears. We know it's going to help others. So Jess, Nikki, Meredith, Georgie, a huge, huge thank you from us. And if you want to show your own thanks to any of these fabulous ladies, then you can find out more about them and their various projects in our show notes.
Absolutely can. All right, so I guess it just leaves us to wrap it up with a quick thank you to the sponsors, doesn't it, Hels?
Yep, so thank you very much to precisionhydration.com. You can get a special 20% off during August with the code OXYGEN20.
Food Cell, you can get 20% off with the code OXYGEN20, valid till 9th of September 2018. Check it out at flowcell.co.uk.
And 3O, which is high performance kit for active women. If you use the code OXYGEN10 until the end of September, you can get £10 off any order over £40 and a free swim cap with all orders at 3o.co.uk.
And one last shout out, Helen's charity cake recipe book, fueledbycake.com. You can get over there and you can still pick up copies of that, can't you, Hels?
Yeah, you can. Thank you very much as well to freesfx.co.uk for providing some funky beats for the introduction.
All right, good stuff. And if you liked what you heard in Blood, Sweat and Gears, then why not go back and listen to some of our other older episodes of the podcast? You can even become a patron of the podcast if you want to. You can follow the link from the homepage of the show or click in the show notes. And while you're there, please, if you could find the time to do it and leave us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you hear, we'd really appreciate that. Positive reviews help us rank higher up the show thing in iTunes, doesn't it, Hels? We get to the top of the page. Our mums really like that. Our mums really struggle to understand what a podcast is. So when I poke at my mum's iPhone in the podcast app and she sees us up at the top of the triathlon bit, she really likes that. So do it for our mums.
Well, thanks again to everyone who's been a part of this show. Rob, I think it was I remember saying to you, I want to do this about periods, and your face was a bit like, oh, Helen, I'm not too sure about that.
Well, exactly, and you've underlined the importance of it to me. We had the chat and you told me all about the reasons you wanted to do it in the big bus ride over, and I hope that at this point there's a lot of males especially listen to this who maybe got to the start of the show with the same attitude I had of, I'm not sure about this, but then had their eyes open to this whole other world of stuff that goes on for women that we don't really understand, and it makes you just a much better person to understand it, doesn't it?
I think so. And if you are a coach or you are a female athlete, go and check out the Fitter Woman app, fitrwoman.com.
Yeah, definitely. All right, listen, thanks very much for listening, everybody. This has been a special episode of the Oxygen Addict Triathlon podcast. Until next week, thanks very much for listening. Tune back in when next week we will have an interview with, I'm going to scroll up through the show notes, we're going to have an episode with Fraser Cartmel next week.
Yes.
Brilliant, nice long interview with Fraser, legend of the UK triathlon scene. So check that out as well. So thanks, everybody. I'm Coach Rob Wilby.
I'm Helen Murray.
And yeah, you've been listening to a special episode of the Oxygen Addict Triathlon podcast. Until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Cheers, everyone. See ya.